Okay, thank you so much, and you're welcome to the first session of our class. We were supposed to meet physically, but of course, due to some issues, we've been unable to. But otherwise, I thought we could just start online. So the task at hand really is for us to look at risk management. And so I thought we could start by looking at the course outline of this course. A couple of things that we'll do, and this shouldn't be very difficult, but remember that, risk, is one of those variables that we just need to attend to, okay? Especially because of the serious consequences that it might have, especially if we do not address it. Okay, a lot of firms have gone under simply because of risk. Actually, one of the courses that we looked at, perhaps last semester, was to look at regulation, right? And so we noticed that in regulations, one of the elements actually is to basically look at the issue of risk. So even the regulators are interested in the issue of risk. So it's very important that we address this aspect. So in terms of the course outline, critically, some of the things that we'll look at obviously is introduction to risk management. Okay. Okay. So we'll look at things such as the nature of risk. Okay. We'll look at the types of risks that can be faced by an organization, and then we'll look at the risk management process. Now, risk management is a process, and so we'll have to look at that. We'll get this topic. I think it is, if we have done corporate finance, then probably we may have already come up with some of these, concepts. But we'll have to look at the theory of risk and return. Okay, I think it is critical. Okay, remember, the higher the risk, the higher the return. That is the genesis of what we'll be looking at, and so we'll have to look at those things. Okay, remember that risk, again, this is from your financial management. Okay, you find that risk is a very critical aspect of your investment analysis. Okay, and I know that if you are doing investment analysis and portfolio management, probably you should already be tackling some of these things. So it is the issue of what return are you getting from an investment, as well as what is the risk associated with that, right? That is what is helping you. So of course, as we are looking at investment appraisal, we also have to really consider the issue of risk, and that's why we have risk and investment appraisal as a subtopic. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And then identifying major financial risks, obviously, is another one. So we need to look at that, a couple of them, right? So we know we have the interest rate risk. Okay, we can be exposed to that. We have the forex risk, again, we can be exposed to that. Okay, commodity risk, operational risk, and so on, and we'll have to look at all those. But eventually, now we'll capture them one by one. Okay, and that is, we'll do interest rate risk, forex risk, credit risk, operational risk, and then the framework itself. So look at the risk management framework. Okay, the development of this framework. Okay, because remember that every institution at least should have a risk management policy. Actually, again, it's part of regulation. So regulators want to look at the risk management policy. Very, very, very important. Of course, we also have to look at the issue of how do we measure risk. Okay, I think from your investment analysis, or even just from your financial management, you should have already known that we usually measure risk by probably the variation of standard deviation. Okay, but of course we'll have to look at other things such as your value at risk, and all these exciting things. But of course, lastly but not the least, we'll look at just international financial risk management, or some global initiatives in risk in financial risk management. So it should be an interesting course, very relevant to this banking and finance program. So I just hope that we'll be able to to appreciate that. Okay, so now that we have appreciated the course outline, I think it is important for us that we begin, our lessons here due to time. So, one of the things that we need to appreciate, okay, well in advance, is that we are living in a world, or in an environment, which is full of uncertainty, right? Full of uncertainty. In other words, anything can happen at any time. That's what the problem is, right? And so this uncertainty presents risk. Okay, this uncertainty present risk. Actually, the way you're looking at it here is that you have got what we call strategic goals, right? Okay, we have got what we call, strategic goals. Maybe just I pause a bit. Okay, so we have got what we call strategic goals, right? Okay, strategic goals. Okay, and there are a couple of these, right? So strategic goals can mean maybe you want to achieve some kind of competitive advantage. Okay, maybe you want to, to increase obviously your sales or your revenue by, a certain margin. You know, I'm sure we do appreciate strategic goals, especially from our strategic management. Now, these strategic goals, which are long term in nature, might be affected by the uncertainties, in the environment. And that's where, risk management is crucial, right? That is where risk management is crucial. So, a couple of things that can happen, if we can remind each other here. For instance, we had issues such as, the COVID-19, for example. It came from nowhere, and that was a threat to the operations of many, entities. Power shortages, the issue of drought. Okay, sometimes it might be like changes in government regulations. All these things, um, can basically challenge your achievement of your strategic goals. Okay, one of the schools that I was doing some work for, prior to the COVID-19, had accumulated some amounts. Anyway, they had a strategic plan of developing a university, building a university. But because of the losses that were experienced, during the period of COVID, it turns out that most of those, funds were, diverted to other things, such as paying for, the salaries and so on and so forth. Like, you know, basically that is how bad, risk can be on an organization. In other words, we are saying that risk basically can affect, your return. Okay, but if we do a good job with our risk management, then we can basically achieve a high return on our investment, which is your ROI. Okay, otherwise, it's very important that we pay attention to the management of risk. Okay, the management of risk. Okay, fine. Yeah. So I think before we even look at some of the the principles of risk management, I think it is important for us to realize that when it comes to risk management, like I have mentioned already, it is a process. Okay, this is a process, okay, whereby we are first of all anticipating what might go wrong, and this is important. We anticipate what might go wrong, and then we try to implement some measures, okay, that can help us, reduce this uncertainty at least to some tolerable levels, right? Okay, so we might not eliminate risk, but the whole risk management process is so that we at least reduce, this risk. Okay, so what are we doing? We are trying to do two things when it comes to risk management. We are trying to reduce, okay, likelihood, okay, and severity. So those are the two things that we are trying to do. Okay, those are the two things that we are trying to do. We are trying to reduce the severity of, we are trying to reduce the frequency, okay, which is the likelihood of loss. And then we are also trying to basically reduce the severity of a loss in the event that that risk actually happens. Okay, so that is what we are looking at. Okay. So that is very important for us to appreciate. Now let us go to what we are trying to look at here in this section, which is the issue of the principles of risk management. Really simple. The first aspect here when it comes to the principles of risk management is the issue of risk identification. Okay, risk identification. I think this is also important because with risk identification, we are trying to, proactively, okay, identify potential risks so that we can take, some kind of like preventive measures, okay, so that we can try and, take up, we can take preventive measures. Okay. Speaking of identifying risks, for me, I actually like learned it the hard way. A situation where you have to ask someone, uh, which number you should send your money. Some money, like which number you should use to send money, right? Apparently, there's a risk that you can send money to an account, of course, which has got credit. And for me, the consequence was that I had to pay twice because the person that I sent the money to was just an agent. And so he was like, no, there's nothing I can do. Your money has been swallowed up. Meanwhile, the money needed to reach the principal, right? So meaning that for me to sort out the issue quickly, I ended up like paying twice. So there's this issue of we need to determine or at least identify possible risks. So you're saying, okay, before I send this money, there is a risk that I might send into an account which probably has got issues. And so what do I do? Because I've identified that risk, I might as well, take proactive, measures and maybe check with the person, right? So these are important things to do, right? But anyway, so it has to be risk management. Like, what could go wrong, right? Is the question here. What could go wrong? Okay. And then we go to the issue of risk control. Okay. We go to the issue of risk control. Okay. Now, for risk control, we are saying that we are trying to balance, preventive and corrective measures. Okay. For risk control, what we are saying is that, look, we are trying to do what we call, continuous or regular checks, right? Continuous or regular, checks. Okay, or regular checks. Our friends, the engineers, you'd find that before maybe they use their machines and whatever, they first of all check, right? Okay, is everything okay? How are the oil levels? How is, how are the gears, right? Just checking all those to my risky areas, okay, is the risk control, because what you're trying to do is, you're trying to at least identify, a problematic area and make corrective measures, okay, before an incident can actually, happen. Okay, so that is very, very, very important. And, in the end, you find that you even come up with, a procedure of how things are supposed to happen. Okay, so for example, uh, I know of a situation where, again, an example of the need to get an invoice before you make a payment, right? It's obviously it's for accounting issues, but also, it might look to be simple, but it can have adverse consequences. At some point we were trying to organize for graduation, and then our colleague made an oversight. They didn't get the invoice for the PA system that we had we were trying to use. Okay, and then what ended up happening is, on the budget they put an amount which was way lower than what the man had apparently increased their prices to. So on the budget someone puts 2,000, meanwhile the man has already gone up to 4,500. Now the accounts office budgeted for 2,000, and that what is released, but meanwhile the man is demanding for 4,500. Now that is a source of stress, a source of problems. Okay, but some of these things can be eliminated had a person gotten an invoice first and then do the budgeting. Simple things, right? So risk control, very important, that we check, okay, do regular checks, before proceeding. Anyway, other principles would include the issue of risk financing. Okay, and here we are saying, what can we do, okay, to basically address risk. Okay, one of the very obvious ways of handling risk is the issue of insurance, right? So remember that insurance is a risk transfer mechanism, basically, where one party is transferring part or all of the risk to another party who is assumed to be in a much better position to handle that risk. So this is happening quite a lot. But other than that, there's also other things, such as maybe the use of financial instruments. Okay, remember there are derivatives, there are hedging products that we can use to address risk, and these hedging products are going to be our point of discussion in this in this topic. Okay, in this in this course. Also, when it comes to these principles, we can also look at the principle of which has to do with risk monitoring and reviews. So this principle emphasizes that risk management is a non-stop process. Okay, is a non-stop process that adapts over time. This is very important. Okay, so meaning that the issue of monitoring is continuous, the issue of reviews is continuous. Okay, so we are constantly being updated about new and emerging risks. So you never have to snooze, okay, when it comes to risk, because things are constantly evolving, it's dynamic, and we constantly have to be addressing that. Okay, remember that now, for example, there's the issue, like when it comes to risk, because of digital transactions and everything, financial technology, fintech. The risk now is cyber security issues, and so we need to address ourselves as risk managers. Now we need to address ourselves with risk. Cyber security. I was reading an article by PwC, and Chibuye and company are saying that this is one of the trendy, areas in banking, the issue of cybercrime. Okay. Yeah, but anyway, what is also essential here is, as a principle, is the issue of the risk framework integration, integrating a consistent framework throughout, an organization. That is, critical. Otherwise, before we leave this section, I think it is important for us to realize that when it comes to risk management, apart from what we have discussed, risk management requires us to be proactive. We cannot afford to be reactive. Okay? The problem with being reactive is that, we might suffer significant costs, right? By a situation where we allow things to happen and then we address it later. What if the risk that happens is catastrophic, right? That's where the problem is. But it takes us to be proactive. Okay, and this is why we are saying that you need to be able to anticipate or identify potential risk in advance. Okay, this might help at least with some kind of prevention, some kind of mitigation. At least it reduces, the amount of loss that you might, experience. So one thing to pick out from here, okay, one thing that you're picking out from there really is that when it comes to risk management, we are going for the proactive approach. Okay, proactive approach. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then obviously, other than that, we have already talked about the fact that, the risk management process is dynamic, right? So as much as possible, we need to appreciate that, the this risk management process is constantly evolving, and it cannot be just standardized and we forget about it. Okay. I think that is the reason why the lot of like professional bodies now, and in most of these professional bodies, the component of risk management, for you to be a member, components of risk management, especially in finance, is being incorporated, so that we are abreast of what is basically going on. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, really, the issue of just being risk aware and being proactive, it can serve as a competitive advantage, right? If we take it seriously, it can actually serve as competitive advantage. Whilst your competitors are ignoring it, you are taking it so seriously. Okay. Yeah. So very, very critical there. Actually, also, you find that the function of risk management would help you, especially in building what's this in building strategic plans, right? Okay. So when it comes to building strategic plans, this can help. So build strategic plans, uh, strategic plans. Okay. Also, even just when it comes to the issue of kind of like earning confidence or trust. And like we said, it will obviously also help with your financial and operational resilience. But also remember that even regulation itself is requiring you to have a robust risk management system. So I hope it is making some sense so far. All we are just trying to do here is to make a case for risk management. Okay. Why should we have it? Stakeholder trust. Okay. Directly impacting on financial and operational resilience. Okay. The issue of the fact that this is a regulatory requirement, and also it actually just helps you with decision making around strategic planning. So very, very, very important. Okay, and those are briefly the justification. Okay, so different professional bodies, and we talked about their why they're in place. But due to time, we are going to appreciate the nature and classification of risks. Okay, the nature, and classification of risks. Okay, so one thing to just point out here really quickly is that risk is interconnected. Okay, and like I have put it in the notes there, we are saying that a single event can trigger a cascade of consequences across multiple risk categories. And the example there that we have provided is, look at a situation where there's a failure in a company's internal processes. Okay, maybe for example there's a cyber security breach. Now remember that a cyber security breach is an operational risk. Okay, and what is an operational risk? We'll discuss it, but an operational risk is a risk that is coming in from normal day-to-day operations of a business. Okay, from strategic issues, but from the normal day-to-day operations. So there's a cyber crime, and then you find that because of this cyber security breach, um, you know the data for your customers is compromised. Now once that happens, remember that anything to do with customer data compromising, anything to do with the safety of customers, that is a regulatory issue, and you'd find that there might be legal penalties for that. Okay, and so again, that is leading to another risk, or connecting itself to another risk, which is compliance risk. Now from compliance risk, you find that different stakeholders now are no longer trusting you, right? They are no longer trusting your brand, and therefore it now connects itself to another type of risk, which is like regulatory, reputational risk, right? Reputational risk. And then after reputational risk, now you find that people are not patronizing your business, right? People are not buying your products or something like that. And that leads ultimately to a financial risk where you are losing financially. So these things are interconnected, and it's very important to really appreciate them like that. Okay, to really appreciate them like that. Okay. So when it comes to the risks, here we go. There is what we call strategic risks. So strategic risk is coming in as a threat to an organization's ability, okay, to achieve its long-term objectives and business goals. I think this is critical. So strategic risk, you have got long-term objectives, which are, your strategic goals. Okay. And then you find threats that might hinder you from achieving those goals. That is strategic risk. Okay. So for example, if a firm is failing to innovate, that is a strategic risk. That is a strategic risk. Sudden changes in government policy or regulation, that is a strategic risk. Okay. Expanding into a new area without even doing any research, that is a strategic risk. Okay. Whereby you now end up, experiencing, financial losses. So that is very important. So a company failing to innovate and then eventually finds itself losing market share to new competition, yes, strategic risk. Okay, so meaning that if you are appreciating what is going on here with strategic risk, it appears to me that when it comes to strategic risk, I think this risk really is requiring that management is a management which is forward looking forward. Okay, you need to be a management that is able to look forward. Okay, that has got some kind of like foresight. I think it is important to have some kind of foresight. But also, it appears to me that when it comes to strategic risk, I think there has to be emphasis on market research. So market research and development, the issue of R&D is very important here. Okay, and I'm sure we have done a course called marketing research, right? Which basically gives you that realization there. Okay. Okay, fine. What other risks are there? Okay. Another categorization would be financial risks. Okay. So financial risks here again, very critical, because these financial risks now are threatening, a firm's assets. Okay, they are threatening a firm's revenue. Okay, they are threatening a firm's, financial stability. That's the pressure here. That is a problem. And so there you are able to see the examples, okay, of these of financial risks. So these include, market risk. Okay, and remember that market risk is basically about changes in market prices, and then because the market prices have changed, they have an effect on your revenue, they have an effect on your financials, and so on and so forth. So for example, maybe the stock price changes, okay, or maybe commodity prices change, or even interest rates, for example, maybe change. Okay, and obviously that might actually affect, the value of your investments, your business, and so on and so forth. So that is what market risk is. Okay, but you also have credit risk. Okay, and here this one is a no-brainer, especially for us bankers, because what we are saying is that credit risk is basically the possibility that a borrower might default. That is what credit risk is. The possibility of a borrower defaulting. That's what credit risk is. Liquidity risk, again, very, very, very simple here. Okay, because liquidity risk is the the possibility, okay, or that a business might fail to meet its short-term, obligations, and usually this is due to the fact that maybe that organization has got insufficient cash, or liquid assets, right? So that is what is happening. Okay. Of course, we also have forex risk. Again, we'll spend a lot of time looking at some of these things, but forex risk is really about currency fluctuations, right? Look at the Zambian kwacha's fluctuation to the dollar. I know at the moment it has appreciated, but the appreciation, depreciation, is affecting a lot of things. It is affecting business planning, it is affecting profitability, it is affecting a lot of things. And so that is a risk as well, especially if you're in a business where you have to interact with foreign currency. Okay. So those are issues. Those are issues. Okay. Other than that, as a bonus, there are other risks that we can talk about. Of course, there's also operational risk, right? So, operational risk, like I mentioned, this is coming in, from your day-to-day business activities. Okay, from your day-to-day business activities, you end up having problems. So for example, maybe you experience losses because of like a failed internal process, right? A failed internal process. Okay, and then it disrupts things, right? So for example, like we have put there the issues of cybersecurity. Okay, maybe equipment failure. It might be, human errors sometimes, people get tired, supply chain disruptions. So that could happen, and it might cause, some kind of operational risk. Okay. But really, for operational risk, it appears to me that for you to address these kinds of risk, I think it is important for to have a robust, right? Robust internal controls. Okay. Robust internal controls here very critical. Okay. Um, and also, just trying as much as possible to train your employees, right? Okay, train employees so that they know basically how to handle things and so on. Okay, so that you avoid the issue of human errors, and also just what putting in some kind of like contingency plans, right? In the event that something bad happens, there's a crisis. What is the contingency plan? Okay, what is the contingency plan? Okay, maybe there's a disruption in internet, there's a disruption in power. Okay, can we do some of these processes manually, right? What do we do? What's the contingency plan? Otherwise, business has to continue, right? Business has to continue. Other kinds of risks include compliance risk and governance risk. Okay. So for compliance, of course, remember that we are in a legal, regulatory, and industry environment with its own requirements, and we need to adhere to that, right? So if we don't, then we are, exposing ourselves to things such as, fines, penalties, revocation of license, and this can actually have, serious, reputational damage. Okay, so we want to be in good standing with the law, okay, and with the regulations, okay, especially when it comes to labor matters, maybe safety issues, the environmental issues, protection. We need to be thinking about those things. It's very important. Okay, and then of course, when it comes to governance issues, of course, it's about corporate governance, right? How are the structures? But at the end of the day, when it comes to some of these compliance and governance issues, really the best way to address this is leadership will. So leadership has to really be strong here, and they need to set the tone. Okay, they need to set the tone so that everybody knows that we are a firm which adheres to industry standards or the regulatory processes. We are we are responding positively there. So yeah, I think we talked a bit about reputational risk, damage to a company's brand or image. Okay, but there are also these other risks, and you can have some time to look at some of these things. Just appreciate them more, so that you are ready. Okay. Okay. We are going to end today's lecture by looking at the risk management process, just the different steps there, and we should be done. Yeah. So when it comes to risk management process, I think what is important is that we need to maybe just define the scope, the context, and the criteria. We need to appreciate the environment, right? Remember that we can use the pastel, right, to know that there is a political environment, there is an economic environment, and so on and so forth. So we need to understand that we have an external environment, okay, and then we also have an internal environment which has to do with, for example, the organizational culture, the competencies, the values, the leadership, the policies of that, organization. So we need to know that and appreciate the environment. Okay, but also we need to, when it comes to the criteria, we need to look at the level of risk tolerance. Okay, risk tolerance of a firm, right? Or what is the degree of risk appetite? I think that is important. Okay, so once we establish these things, okay, as a preliminary, then now we can go to the steps. Okay, so the first step, if we are to be critical, is the risk identification. Okay, so this is like the first step. Okay, risk identification. Okay, so really here we're just trying to ensure that we recognize these risks, and it means we need to ask a couple of questions. We need to ask some questions such as, what could happen, right? What could happen? Okay, how could it happen? Okay, how could it happen? And then we are also saying that, and why might it happen? Okay, what could happen? Probably what could go wrong? Okay, how could this happen? And why might it happen? These are questions that are helping us identify risks. Okay, identify risks. We'll talk about this more as we go, but for now we can appreciate that. Okay. Other than that, we are saying that there's also the issue of the issue of analysis and assessment as the second step. Okay, so here we are saying, okay, once we have established or we have identified the risks, we are saying, what is the nature of these risks that we have identified, and their level. So basically we are looking at it from, what are their likelihood of happening and what are their potential impacts. I think that is critical. Okay, so if we have identified that, okay, we are in this business of of real estate. Okay, there's a possibility that people, might not take care of the property. Okay, they might not take care of the property. Okay, so now what are some of the things that can happen? What is the likelihood that people might not take care, and what could be the potential impact on the organization? And that is why sometimes you find that landlords, for example, are opting for a family to stay in their house than students, making it a boarding. You make money as a boarding house, but the thing is that how well will it be taken care of? That's the pressure. Okay. So anyway, so basically those are the things. So you're looking at the likelihood of something happening, and then the potential impact. Okay, the potential impact. Okay. And remember that when it comes to some of these analysis, it can either be quantitative, or qualitative in nature. Okay, quantitative or qualitative in nature. So you can have a time to look at that table there that we did. But in addition to that, there's the issue of risk evaluation and prioritization. So once we have looked at risk analysis and assessment, okay, i.e. the likelihood of something happening, as well as the severity if it happened, now we are saying, okay, why don't we evaluate and prioritize? Okay, this is a good word here, prioritization. Okay, now first of all, what we can do when it comes to risk evaluation is, this is typically where we begin to compare risks. Okay, so comparing risk analysis results, okay, to determine if action is needed. This is critical. So once we do this, okay, we compare, we rank them, then we know which risks are more urgent and requires attention. This is important. Remember that a firm has got limited resources, and it might not manage, to manage every risk. It might not manage to take care of every risk. So the best is to rank them and see which ones it can prioritize. I think that is critical. Okay, that is critical there. Okay, so that is that stage. And then the fourth stage is the risk treatment and response options. Okay, so what are some of the strategies that we can use to respond to a risk that we have identified, assessed, and ranked? Okay, so after doing all that processes that we have done before, one strategy could be to avoid. So you might say, okay, I think that it's about eliminating the risk entirely by not proceeding with with an activity. Okay, with an activity. That is risk avoidance. So you just see, okay, I think maybe that this route is dangerous, but it is a shortcut, but it is dangerous. Then what you do is maybe just avoid that route and take a different one, right? Okay, you notice that you may want maybe to introduce maybe new courses as CBU, but then you're saying that might have an impact on your finances. So after doing the assessment, you say, no, I think we can't proceed here. Anyway, that is risk avoidance, a situation where you decide to eliminate the risk entirely by not proceeding with an activity. Other than that, you can do the risk reduction method. Okay, here you're trying to reduce the likelihood as well as the impact of the risk. Okay, so for example, on the road, for example, if we are going to reduce the likelihood of a motor vehicle accident, one of the things that you're doing is you're doing safety checks first. Okay, also making sure that the person driving the vehicle has got a driver's license, right? and observing all the traffic rules. So at least you're reducing the likelihood of a motor vehicle accident happening. Also, not driving under the influence of alcohol, then you're reducing the likelihood. Okay. But of course, some of these things, even if you try as much as possible to avoid them, they might happen. So you might find that you are still involved in a motor vehicle accident. But for you to reduce the impact, what do you do? What measures? Probably you were putting on a seat belt, so that might help you. Okay. Maybe there's a fire extinguisher, right? Or even airbags as well, right? So that is helping you to reduce the impact of that risk once it happens. Anyway, so that's about risk reduction as a strategy. The other strategy here is the issue of risk sharing or risk transfer. Okay, and the most common one is the issue of insurance, but also it might be the issue of contracts, and we'll look at these especially when it comes to the derivatives. Okay, so through a contract you are able to to transfer the risks, but also even the issue of just like incorporation. When you incorporate your entity, you find that you know the owners of the business, for example, are separate from the business. Okay, and so that means that you have effectively transferred your risks. Okay. But also there's the issue of risk acceptance. So consciously you might say that I will accept the risk, especially if you notice that maybe the benefits outweigh the risk. So you make a conscious decision to accept the risk. So those are the strategies, right? Those are the strategies. Those are the strategies. Okay. So the process continues, and some of the last parts is the issue of monitoring, right? So I think this is like 5. So monitoring and review. Okay. So basically here what you're just saying is you're just trying to detect any changes in the internal and the external environment, right? Just trying to identify if there are any new emerging risks. Okay, checking okay how effective or relevant the existing controls and treatments are, right? Okay. Are they still effective, right? And then just learning from lessons from events, to improve, your understanding of the identified risks. So that's basically what you're doing in monitoring and review. But of course, remember that all this has to now be reported and has to be communicated. So this is like the final stage of the risk management process, where you know from your analysis here, you need now to provide or share the information that you have obtained, okay, with the various stakeholders, okay, so that they have an understanding of what risks the company is being faced and so on. So meaning that here we're supposed to obviously do a report. It has to be done, documented, okay, and it should basically be based on the information that is available. At the end of the day, you find that you foster what we call a risk aware culture, okay, and then ultimately you find that decision making is actually based on this information, and this is critical for success of a business. So basically these are the issues that I thought we could discuss today. You can look at some case studies that are provided here around the Kawe lead poisoning crisis. Okay, metals as well. You can also relate that all these are risks that can happen to an entity, and we need to be proactive. We need to try as much as possible to be proactive. So that's basically where we end. All we did was to just introduce risk, okay, to look at the different types of risks and then the process, the risk management process. So I hope we're able to pick out one or two things from this discussion. Okay, thank you.